Okay, let's begin. Welcome back to Women in Data Science Turku event. I hope you have had a relaxing lunch break and have had already a cup of coffee, so you're ready for our next speaker that I'm very excited to introduce. Professor Alison Heppenstall is a professor of geocomputation at the University of Leeds and also an ESRC Turing Fellow. She has particular interest in data analytics, developing approaches for detecting hidden spatial temporal patterns in big data, quantifying uncertainty in simulations, and building more robust individual-based models through probabilistic programming and reinforcement learning. We already heard about smart building in the morning. Let's go bigger scale, see how smart cities are. Floor is yours, Alison.
Thank you so much. Can I just check? I am off mute, aren't I?
You are, yeah.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I mean, the talks I've seen so far are brilliant. So it's really exciting to be amongst women who are doing this type of work. My talk is going to be a little bit more general. I want to give you a flavour for agent-based models and the sort of systems that I'm working within. And I do work within social systems, spatial social systems, and a lot of my work falls within urban analytics, and hence the cities. So I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour about that and examples of the work we're doing. But I'm probably also going to complain quite a lot because of all the problems and the challenges that we have in this field. Feel free to throw any questions at me. Right. Okay. First off, acknowledgements, mainly because I always forget to do this. I work with a great team of people at Leeds, which need to be flagged. Andrew Crooks in the States as well. And there's a lovely book there if anyone's interested in learning more about agent-based models. Okay, so we were supposed to meet in person last year. Sadly, some things happened that we can't. So I thought I would say hello from where I am. I am at the University of Leeds, and Leeds is in the north of England, in the county of Yorkshire, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. There's a bit of scenery. The picture of the people in the red jackets is my brass band where I play. But Yorkshire is famous for our Yorkshire puddings. We like our pints of beer and our cups of tea. So I would love for any of you to come and visit us in Leeds. We have a huge amount of agent-based modelers, and we'd be really excited to have anybody come to visit us at the moment. So back to the talk. As I said, I'm going to give you a flavour of what is the problem that we're particularly interested in dealing with. What is an agent-based modelling, and hopefully why are we using an agent-based model? Some examples of how agent-based models have been used, just to give you an idea of it. And then, as I said, some of the challenges that we have and work that's ongoing. And it's really great to see the previous talk on reinforcement learning was absolutely fantastic. And I'll be talking a little bit about reinforcement learning as well. So there's obviously lots of crossovers going on. Okay, so first of all, this video was taken in a bygone era where we could walk around freely. This is Trafalgar Square in London. And this is one of the biggest sort of tourist attractions there is. Now, there are people there. This was taken, I think it was about 1 o'clock on an afternoon. Who are these people? What are they doing? Where are they going to go? We don't know. This is sort of known as the ambient population people who are moving around cities in the daytime, and we don't really know what they're doing. We have lots of data that can try and help us. We have environmental data. We will have footfall counters, traffic cameras, air pollution counters. And we'll also have social media devices, phones, people check into places. Now, if we can link those data sets together, we can start to answer, who are they? What are they doing? Where are they going? And that would be incredibly useful for urban planners, councils, and so forth. We also have all this sort of new data, and we have machine learning methods as well coming online. Some of these machine learning methods have been around for decades, have just been rebranded, but we have a lot of new methods that are coming online to help us deal with this data. Now, one of the big problems we have with this data, one of the many problems we have, challenges, are understanding, fusing the data together first to make it a wholesome data set that's verified, but also interrogating it to understand what patterns are emerging that are important that we need to put into our models. Now, if we can take the machine learning and the data, bring them together in some way, we can start to answer some really complicated questions. So what would the impact on the health service in the UK be if we pedestrianised the centre of London? Therefore, no cars, no air pollution. What would air pollution do? How would that impact on how people move around? How would that impact on their health in both of exposure to air pollution and obesity? So these are really complicated questions that we can't answer at the moment, but we have all the raw materials there. And that's kind of our motivation in the urban analytics and agent-based modeling. We want to be able to use data and methods to understand cities, to make them better for people to live in. This kind of is the same thing. Why are urban environments so difficult to predict? Well, in an answer, space, geographical space. There are no hard, fast laws in geography. I know there's one there, I'll come to that, as opposed to physics, maths, chemistry. Social systems there is no universal law of social systems. Space is particularly a headache because what may happen at one point in time and space can be completely different to another time. A process at your very first day of your simulation could be really important and completely unimportant at the end of it, and vice versa. Space is really difficult. Understanding how trends and processes emerge over time and space and how they feed together is incredibly difficult to get on. We have allegedly one law, Tobler's law. I'm not convinced that this is fully rigorous anymore. Everything is related to everything else. Near things are more related than far things. You could probably argue that that still does work. Human behaviour, I'll come back to, but some aspects of human behaviour are very hard to simulate. Now, with my classes of students, I would at this point ask them to pick a number between 1 and 4. And I could guarantee at least 80% will pick the number 3. Now, that tells me that there are some aspects of human behaviour that are easy to simulate and model in. Pre-COVID times, most people would leave the house, go to work, come back in the evening, perhaps some diversions. There's some routine behaviours that we can simulate. However, there's lots of other behaviours, softer behaviours that are really hard to understand. And again, this is where data may help us. There's been a huge shift, certainly in the spatial social sciences, from modelling populations as a whole, the aggregate level, purely because we had no data or enough computational power to do anything else. But a lot of work in the last 50 years has been based on aggregate level work. Now, with data and computational models, we now realise that individuals are really the drivers of social systems. They power the processes. Mike Batty said, cities are products of individuals, networks. These networks that have flows of information, money, disease lately, that sort of thing. So we really need to be looking at understanding, simulating cities from the bottom up, not the top down. Which brings me nicely to agent-based modelling. I don't know if anyone knows what agent-based modelling is, so this is my lecture slide that I tend to use. SimCity, this is a computer game that was popular probably a couple of decades ago, is a great example. On the bottom right, you have an avatar. You create one of these in your agent-based model. You give them attributes, usually from a census. You give them behaviours. You create a virtual environment. You put them in there and let them wander around and interact. You see what emerges. Emergence being one of the key elements of agent-based models. You don't know what you're going to get out of it from what you put in. I'm going to really show my age here. The little clip thing in the middle, that's Mr. Clippy. He was the original Microsoft Word help. And he's been cited as the very first agent. And you'd be doing something in Word and he'd pop up with some annoying advice in a really sort of peppy manner. Universally hated. And the guy who actually coded him had death threats and went into hiding. But probably showing my age a bit there. How have agent-based models been used? Well, this slide was put together a couple of years ago. Of course, if I did this in the last 12 months, all we'd see is COVID, dreadful COVID models. But prior to COVID, there's quite a spread of applications of how agent-based modelling has been used. Now, on the axis down in your bottom left, it's minutes and sort of micro models like neighbourhoods, buildings, going all the way up to migration. Now, probably 95% of applications would fall within up to the day line. A lot of the agent-based models are very small scales, time scale. Now, the reasons for that are data and computational work as well. If you construct a really detailed agent-based model and you have agents interacting, feedback, etc., it's still, even with cloud computing, massively computationally demanding. I just wanted to give you a flavour of a type of work that's out there. Now, as I keep saying, data is been one of the sort of, I think, transformational elements, along with the increase in computational power, that's really brought agent-based modelling along. Having all this data is fantastic. As I said, previous 50 years, we've had very little data, built big aggregate models, spatial interaction models, we've moved people along. Now we're actually have the opposite problem. We have too much data. Absolute potential of what we could do, but there's a massive problem is that we don't know quite what to do with it or how to handle it. So there's huge amounts of work going on in data wrangling, so taking all this data, fusing it together to make really usable data sets. And that's going to be fantastic for agent-based modeling in helping us address validation, behaviour, etc., which I will come on to. I put this one in because I just wanted to drive home a point that these sort of new data, these big data, really help us get on behaviours. And if we can grab that behaviour and we have all this data at an individual level, we can start building models that allow us to explore different scenarios. So if a tube strike happens, a train strike in one of the UK cities, what will happen? A big drive at the moment in the UK is looking at, once we're eventually let out of lockdown, how can we alter the urban infrastructure to have people move around in a more safe manner? Should we pedestrianise roads, put in new street furniture? That's a huge one. These models can really help us do that if we know how people are going to move and behave. The little screenshot is just to amuse myself, really. This we had our UK Prime Minister, we developed a track and trace app for COVID. And the UK Prime Minister was like, this is going to be world-beating, brilliant. It really was, because it was so dreadful. However, the idea of it, people going around with this app, collecting data, knowing who they've interacted with and where they've been at what time, it kind of represents a holy grail of sort of data sets that certainly in my area we'd like to get hold of. Obviously, for reasons of ethics, we wouldn't be allowed that type of data, but it's a tantalizing thought. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of where we've gone wrong and some good work as well. So this is work, one of my colleagues, and the idea here was, okay, we've got these agent-based models. We want to understand how people are moving around a town, well, a city ultimately, but let's start with a town. Can we take all the different types of data sets, create this agent-based model? Can we calibrate and validate it? Really important, can we validate it so we know what we're seeing actually is going on? So the UK census was used to create a population. Lots of other different types of data sources were used. UK time work survey, which a lot of people fill in, so we know roughly where people are doing and what they're doing during the daytime. We put people into houses and we watched them go off around. I don't know if I can get this. I don't think you'll be able to see it, but the blue dots will move around as people move around. And we calibrated this against sensor data. So all these, this is a couple of towns near where I live, near Leeds. And the councils all put sensors in because they wanted to know how many people are in the town centre. Is it related to tourism? So we had access to this data. So we had a great data source to be able to calibrate against as well. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let me tell you what went wrong. So the dark line is the real data. That's actually what happened. Our first attempt is the dotted line. So you can see around about 10 o'clock, there's a massive difference between the model prediction and what actually happened. But we've got all the right data. We've built a really good model. We've done sensitivity analysis. Why, oh why? Well, so I went and presented the results of this to one of the science cafes at one of the towns. And the very strong message came back to me, yes, your model's all lovely in that, but you've forgotten a really important demographic here. So in all of the models that we built, we hadn't captured the retired population. Now, normally in the UK at 10 o'clock in the morning, the adult working population have left to go to Leeds, Bradford, one of the nearby cities. The children are all in school. So the people who we hadn't captured moving around these towns were the retired population, the grey population. So we went and found other types of data that captured this, put it in, and then the result was much better. I think this is really important as a lesson for data-driven modelling is a great idea in theory. Well, but you still need to talk to people, and you need to embrace the sort of theories as well around the areas. We had lots of data, we did all the testing and that, but we still were way off. We hadn't uncovered the right processes, and that's really key to these models. Behaviour is another headache. You'll get the impression that agent-based modelling is one long headache, and you are right, but it's fun headache. Behaviour is really hard to do. As I said, all this new data we're getting is fantastic because it's given us an insight into a potential insight into what people are doing and why they're doing it as well. And this has kind of spawned a whole area of behavioural agent-based modelling. So now if you go and look at the literature, there's huge amounts of behavioural frameworks out there that you literally can just drag and drop into your model, thereabouts. The example I've got here is some work that we did a few years ago looking at criminal behaviour. And this was inspired by work we worked with the local police force, and they wanted to understand if we're going to redevelop an area of Leeds, what's going to happen to some of the crime. In this case, it's house burglary, people breaking in and robbing your house. We had data from the police, we had all sorts of statistics, but we also had interviews with burglars. I must point out, these are the unsuccessful ones, the ones who have been caught and in jail, but we had that information as well. What motivated you? So we developed a model, a virtual environment of Leeds, and we had virtual burglars. And we had this agents can also be buildings. So our agents were buildings, and they're also individuals. The individual burglars, we used a model called PECS, physical, emotional, cognitive, social, 4 different areas that would control the behaviour of the burglar. So if they were hungry, they would go eat. If they were tired, they would sleep. If they wanted money, they would look for opportunities to burgle, to get goods to sell. Which, you know, it still is crude, but trust me, at the time was quite a sophisticated way to do this. So here, and again, this is a little age, you're going to see red dots moving around, and these are burglars. The underlying image, this is Leeds. This is an area of Leeds called Headingley, quite close to university, and it's one of the most burgled parts of the UK because every street has big houses with 6 students in with lots of laptops and other things burglars would find attractive. Sorry, I've just lost my mouse key. There we go. So you'll see little red stars moving around. Those are the burglars going about their business, and it will zoom in. At some point, you'll just see them go into a house or a building and they burgle. Then they move on. And then, but all this behavior is driven by this behavioral model. Great. So what we did then, as I said, there was a big regeneration project ongoing in Leeds at the time. So we used this model, simulated the part of Leeds that was going to be redeveloped. The houses would be much more secure. And the police wanted to know where would the crime displace. And we predicted really well where crimes would move within the area. And what's nice about this work is that it was a behavioural model. We had lots of different types of data in there as well, but we had huge amounts of engagement with the police as well. And they really fed into the process of developing the model and took the results to develop into their strategy for target hardening, making the area safer from burglars. So that's kind of a nice successful example. This example, I could not bring myself to put anything COVID in. This is an example from Andrew Crooks. And actually, I think it's, even though it's almost 10 years old, is still a really nice example of how you can use agent-based models, other types of data and behaviour. He looked at the spread of cholera in a refugee camp in Kenya, Somalia. Gathered all sorts of crowdsourced data, made the model so explicitly the agents will make a decision about where they're going on need. So not quite as sophisticated as the previous example, but within that direction. And there's all these different factors that they took into account as well. So a kind of sophisticated model. Knowledge was fairly universal in this model. So if an outbreak of cholera happened in one place, everybody knew about it, which is kind of a limitation, but still. They put in a very simple SEIR model. We've probably all heard about these models in the last year, but that was embedded in, and it related to the environment as well and to decision making. Results of this, you know, what was nice is that they sort of predicted the outbreaks in there, which matched fairly well with what had happened. But they also played around with a bunch of different types of interventions. Okay, so on day 6, if we do this, what happens? What it doesn't do, there was no social networks in there. As I said, knowledge was universal. So if there was an outbreak of cholera in one place, everybody knew and avoided that point, which is probably fairly unrealistic. So social networks would be really useful to have in there as well. There's also no real-time updating. So the model was initialized on day 0 and it ran. So if something major happened around day 9, this model couldn't take account of it as well. And probably these types of models, you want to be fairly reactive in what they can do. Which takes me to the elephant in the room. So yes, so we've had this little COVID thing going on. I think in terms of my area, it has been a curse and a blessing. Certainly within my research group and with Turing, the work that we were doing was essentially put on hold, and we've been focused on doing different types of work to do with COVID. Why is COVID a curse and blessing for agent-based modelling? Well, this article appeared here in the Washington Post last March, and it is a really good article. They use NetLogo, little simulations to show how a simple agent-based, individual-based model can model disease spreading. And I think this caught a lot of people's imaginations. Now, agent-based models, you can construct them really easily. There's so many packages out there now where with minimal coding experience, you can just go and type and produce a model. That's the downside of it. In the UK also, I should add that our eventual lockdown last March in the UK was informed by an individual-based model out of Imperial College. So that, along with these sort of articles, really sort of put individual-based modelling right at the forefront. The result being that when you go to Google Scholar, type in the word agent and COVID, you just get masses of articles. The curse of this is that majority of these articles are poorly initialized, poorly validated, and whoever has written them, they don't really understand agent-based modeling and what it can do and the limitations. So really bad science. And I guess the upside is that this is helping promote agent-based modeling to be more accepted and understood as a technique as well. But yeah. There's a rant there, but I don't have time for that one. This I found, which I thought was interesting. So I'll set the video up in a moment. This is from about 2014, and it's from an article in Nature. And somebody took an agent-based modelling and thought, what would happen if there's a global pandemic? And in this case, a flu pandemic. So what you'll see, I'll set this off. Here we go. So what you're going to see in a moment are some blobs, red blobs appearing. People are coming into the west coast of America with flu. How do these people spread across America? And you'll suddenly see these blobs where the major airports are in urban centres. And then, annihilation. No, everyone's ill. Everybody recovers. It's a happy ending. But this is a really nice example of agent-based model and space, and it operates a very simple disease transmission model at the back of it, but it's also huge. 250 million people I think were simulated within this, so a really nice example of what we could do as well. Right, sorry, I lost my mouse. So why am I've been talking about bits and pieces? Well, certainly within my area, within Turing in the UK, there is a massive drive towards real-time simulation, the creation of something called digital twins. Now, digital twins in this context are the sort of SimCity simulation or within a computer. And you can see why it's an attractive prospect. If you can simulate all the different interventions, you can play around with things in your computer. And agent-based models are sort of being touted as the technique to drive all of this. Now, as I said, there is a number of challenges. I've got a theory about a law, Heppenstall's law, that once a technique of some sort, these big navel-gazing articles about the key challenges, future developments, issues start appearing, the technique has reached some point of acceptance, and that is absolutely the case with agent-based modelling. Prior to the deluge of COVID articles in the last 12 months, the literature is saturated with all these big articles. I'm guilty of them myself. However, interestingly, there was an article back in 2008 by Andrew Crooks. It's a really great article, and it listed out these are the challenges we need to meet. If you read any of the articles that have come out in the last 2 years, those challenges are still there. For some reason, we have not really advanced very much on the methodological challenges. In terms of applications, we can simulate absolutely everything, but we're not sort of tackling the behaviour, validation, calibration, understanding the complex results that we have in there. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm not going to go on too much. So the last few slides are just sort of quickly work that we're currently doing in Leeds to try and address some of these challenges. And there is great work going on at other institutions as well. One of the things we're looking at is data assimilation, real-time data assimilation. Can we put data into a model as it's running and for really accurate short-term predictions? So if an incident happens in our city and we need to know what people can do within like the hour, that sort of time scale, how can we do that? Data's coming in, can we throw it in and have live predictions? And why would we want to do that? Well, really, we probably know, anyone who does modelling know that you start your model and your output at day one match. As you go along, they diverge, you put new data in, and you converge back. But we want to keep them as close together as possible. We're doing that by playing around with a bunch of techniques, Kalman filters, etc. And we've got it's a really simple example, but we started with a train station. Can we simulate how people move from one side of a train station to another? We have data on this. Can we input data in real time and get it right? Very, very simple start. It turns out that, you know, putting data into your model in real time is a lot more complicated than we anticipated. Something else that we're doing is uncertainty quantification. So other disciplines do this so much better. This is virtually absent in agent-based modelling. Maths, meteorology in particular, have fantastic, well-developed methods. Now, of course, the systems they apply it to are very different to the sort of social systems, non-linear systems that we have. However, there's a lot of potential for adaptation. So we've been playing around with history matching, ABC, which is used a little bit. The idea being that, can we shrink down the solution space to get the right sort of parameters in our model to match what we need at the other end? And can we use these to sort of quantify the uncertainty as well? Please contact me about this afterwards. I'm not going into details now. This one I almost took out because Natalia's presentation I thought was fantastic, but we're also sort of dipping our toes into reinforcement learning. And this time, you know, with the problems I've talked about with behaviour, if we use reinforcement learning, can we put our agents in a city, a 3D environment using Unity? Can we get them to learn the behaviours we want? One of the big problems, I guess, in most models is you tend to initialize based on historical data, things that have happened in the past, not what's going to happen in the future. And that could be a limited range of behaviors. And you might need a much broader behavior. So can we get the agents to learn behaviors themselves? It's sort of things we're playing with. I put these videos in just a simple illustration I stole from my colleague Ed Manley of what a trained agent looks like. It goes between two goalposts, and what an untrained one does. And but I think the previous presentation has told us that. Okay, to summarize, so I work in urban analytics, simulating cities using, amongst other things, agent-based models. Cities are predicted to grow to, well, the number of people who live in cities will be greater than those who don't by 2050. Massive inward migration. There's a real pressure to understand how cities function now, so in the future we can make them more sustainable, more equitable, we can make them really work for the people who live in them. Things like global pandemics and, you know, that's a major shock to a system. How can we use this sort of modelling system to release people from lockdown, make the cities safer, understand how people move around? There's massive amounts of challenges going on in spatial agent-based modelling. Space is a real pain. You know, if it's just time, great, but adding that complication of space really does give you a new set of challenges. And how to meet those challenges really is by looking at what other people do in other disciplines, you know, what are the advances in physics, maths, psychology, and bringing those in to agent-based modelling as well. Being collaborative, agent-based modelers tend to sit in their own little ivory towers and not share. And maybe that's because our application areas are so unique that I wouldn't have much to share with somebody who's an ecologist agent-based modeler, but there needs to be greater collaboration. Data is an ongoing issue. But you know, there's lots of really promising work going on to develop the agent-based modelling. Just please don't build COVID models anymore. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alison. Like always, it was very fascinating to listen to you. I totally enjoyed it. So let's see if there is any question. I already have something in the Q&A, and one of the attendees is asking if you could provide a reference to the Cholera disease transmission model paper.
Oh, the Cholera, yes, it's Andrew Crooks. I think it's Crooks 2014. If you just Google that. Andrew Crooks has got a really good website. He's at Buffalo State University.
Yeah. And I saw Aina had a question. I opened, you can talk now.
Can you hear me right now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me right? All right, thanks. So I actually have two questions. First of all, thanks a lot for the very interesting presentation. So I remember you mentioning that you do some calibration of the data against sensors. Can you specify, do you use Kalman filters or something else for that?
Yeah, so in that work, so the Kalman filters are used for data assimilation type work, which I can send you some reference to, or you could email me offline, we could have a quick chat. That other work that I presented with the sensors, it literally was just, we were doing counts, mean counts against it, so nothing too sophisticated. But the other work with the Kalman filters, I'd be really happy to have a chat with you about. It sounds like you might know something about it.
And then I had another question, which is, so you were talking about these limitations, especially in context of COVID, when you use this agent-based modeling. So what would you say are then the main limitations?
The main limitations, data understanding, poorly defined models. I reviewed a bunch of COVID models for one of the journals I'm an editor on, and the models, the assumptions are so gross that nothing meaningful will come out at the end of them. There's no engagement with epidemiologists or really, understanding the transmission rates in there. Poor data to build in behaviour. No real data to actually validate the findings. It's kind of like, yes, this is how a transmission model would work, but the whole research process is pretty poor. And one of the things, several of the ones I looked at, you could have used a regression model or a microsimulation model. I just don't get me going.
Right. Yeah, okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It seems there is no other question. As I already mentioned in the previous talks, and you see already on the screen as well, Alison's contact details are available in the events booklet, and she tries to answer whenever she can if you have a question for her. I definitely see potentials for collaboration. I'm sure many other people see it as well. So thank you very much again, and we will be in contact, I guess, in future. And now